What could cause a man to randomly kill two families whom he's never met? To grab his father's guns and without thought walk into two homes a distance of 2 states apart, only to kill everyone he came in contact with. Welcome back to Crime Cafe, and today we're going to be talking about Levi King, who gunned down 5 victims in 2 separate states with absolutely no motive and no selfish reasoning for this horrific act. So make sure you go grab yourself a cup of coffee and come join me. It was on September 29th in 2005 in Anderson, Missouri, when Dawn McCool was taking her elderly father-in-law on a trip to the grocery store. Her father-in-law, Orly, was a 70-year-old Army vet, and he was a retired restaurant owner. His wife was currently out of town, and he wasn't able to carry the groceries in the house himself, so Dawn usually helped him with those things. It was around 2 p.m. when they finished grocery shopping and headed back home. When they got to Orly's house, Dawn started taking the bags in, and she makes her way down the stairs when Orly enters the house behind her. A man in dark clothing steps out of the closet and without hesitation shoots Orly in the side of the head and kills him instantly. Before Dawn could even comprehend what was happening, the man was shooting multiple rounds down the stairs directly at her. He made sure that they were both dead, and then he grabbed the keys to Orly's parked 2005 Dodge Dakota and he fled the scene. The killer drove for more than 13 hours without any destination, and he ended up making his way to a small town called Pampa, which is in the Texas Panhandle. The killer made a spontaneous turn off a highway at around 3:48 a.m. He saw an old-looking farmhouse, and he felt that this was a perfect place to stop and see if he can catch some sleep. While he thought it was abandoned, he still took his AK-47 inside with him. He broke into the home through the back door. He realized that a family did live there, and he immediately made his way to the master bedroom. And inside that bedroom lay 31-year-old Brian Conrad and his 36-year-old pregnant wife, Michelle Conrad. And just down the hall were Michelle's 2 kids from a previous marriage, asleep in separate bedrooms. As soon as the killer opened up the master bedroom door, he started shooting Brian. Michelle, waking up, realizing what's happening, screams at the top of her lungs as the family's dog leaps towards the killer, and he shoots Molly, the dog, and she was killed instantly. And next, he turned his gun towards Michelle and shot her until she stopped screaming. Startled awake by her mother's screams, 10-year-old Robin got out of bed to see what was happening, and she opened up her bedroom door and only peeked outside while kneeling down towards the floor. She could see a man leaving her parents' bedroom. She ran into her bed and pulled the covers over herself, hoping that he wouldn't see her. The killer unfortunately did see her, and he made his way to her bedroom, and as soon as he opened the door, he shot at the bed 1 round, and it ended up scraping her shoulder and lodging into her pillow. Robin yelled and grunted and threw herself to the floor, and she realized in that moment that she should play dead, and that's exactly what she did. She didn't move, she hardly moved her chest to breathe, and she laid there while the killer made his way to her brother's bedroom. The intruder shot 14-year-old Zach, and he made his way downstairs into the kitchen, and he made himself something to eat. He stayed there for a while, and Robin laid as still as she could through the entire night without making a sound. He left the house and got into Orly's truck once again and took off. And that is when Robin could see the sun coming up, and she decided to make her way downstairs. She didn't look in the direction of any bedroom. She figured what had happened, and she made her way straight to the cordless phone. She grabbed that and walked directly outside and called 911. The first responders arrived at the Conrad's home at 7:24 a.m. and they saw Robin in the driveway sitting in the back of her dad's truck bed, and she was calm and collected. And while the deputies made their way inside with their guns drawn, Robin asked if she could feed the animals, and she immediately started taking care of them while the deputies found her family. The detectives were completely stumped. They found 15 shell casings inside the home, along with shoe prints, tire prints. Absolutely nothing was stolen, and it seemed like a very random act of violence. There was no known enemies against this family. Just couldn't put the story together. They didn't understand why this happened to this family, and the town of Pampa didn't see crime like this. So it was extremely new to the town, and everyone was just terrified and felt awful for the family and for Robin. Back in Anderson, Missouri on September 30th, a day after Dawn and Orly's cold-blooded murder, Orly's nephew Alan went over to his uncle's to check in on him because he hasn't heard from him in a while, and he saw that his uncle's truck wasn't there, but he noticed that the front door was open. So when he went inside, he immediately saw his uncle laying on the ground, and he grabbed a cordless phone and ran back outside and called the police. It wasn't until deputies arrived that they found Dawn shot and killed down the stairs. They saw that nothing but the truck was stolen. They collected any evidence that they could, which was just mostly shell casing. They started conducting eyewitness interviews, and they had one witness, Shane Walters. He said that he saw a man, it was around 2 p.m., sneaking and walking around Orly's home. He claimed that he strikingly looked similar to a man he knew named Scott King. Scott King only lived a few miles away from Orly's home, and the police knew for a fact that he reported a burglary at his house the exact same day that Orly and Dawn were murdered. He reported that several guns, including a 9mm, were stolen. The sheriffs contacted Scott immediately, and they were actually able to go right over there and search around the house. And Scott showed them an area that his two sons use as target practice, and they were able to collect some of the shell casings that were on the ground there. There were tons of them, so they picked some of those up, and they noticed that some of them looked identical to the ones at the crime scene. While the casings were sent to the forensics, a little while later, Scott walked into the police station, and he told the police that he suspected that his son may have had something to do with the murders. Scott told them he hasn't seen his 23-year-old son Levi since 7 a.m. on September 29th, the day of the murder. He took him to a bus stop. Levi got out of the car to go to the bathroom, and he didn't return. And he did not hear from him after that, and he didn't know if he actually got on a bus or not. As the case is inching closer to grabbing their suspect, the killer had traveled 500 miles south of Pampa into El Paso and across the border into Juarez, Mexico. It's during this time that the sheriff gets the confirmation that the shell casings from the crime scene and the casings from King's house are a match. This information, along with the disappearance of Levi King, was enough evidence to issue an arrest warrant for Levi King on the suspicion of killing Orly and Dawn McCool. As Levi's continuing to drive throughout El Paso, he makes a huge mistake by exiting off main highway, and he decided to turn around, and in doing that, he headed straight towards a border patrol, and he was still in Orly's stolen truck. He drove up to the border patrol at the US-Mexico border, and he was asked to see some ID, and he actually handed the border patrol multiple IDs, one belonging to Brian Conrad. He was then asked if he had any weapon. Levi admitted that he did. Immediately asked to exit the vehicle and was taken into a secluded room while the agents searched the car, and they found a 9mm Smith & Wesson, a .380, a scoped rifle, and an AK-47. This is when they also discovered Missouri Department of Corrections ID in between the seats, and they were able to see that he was Levi King. The agents fingerprinted him and ran his name through the system, and it came up that there was a warrant for his arrest for the suspicion of two murderers back in Missouri. The Border Patrol immediately handed him over to El Paso police, and they themselves conducted an interview with Levi, and it only took a few minutes, and he let them know that he stole his father's guns and he killed the McCools and used their truck to escape. And that's as much as he said. He didn't say anything else. And the El Paso police handed him over to the Missouri police. So back in Missouri on October 6, 2005, the detectives formally interview Levi about the murders of Orly and Don McCool. Levi said that after getting out of his dad's car that morning, he actually ended up walking back to his dad's house and slept in an abandoned car they had parked on their property. He waited for his dad to leave with his younger siblings, and once he did, he went inside the home, broke into his father's room, and took a 9mm, a scoped rifle, an AK-47, and he put them all in a book bag. Levi claims that he didn't have a plan. He just left his dad's around noon and started walking through the woods. He stashed the 2 rifles and a bag of ammo on the side of the road, and he just kept walking until he came upon Orly's house. He watched Don and Orly leave for their grocery trip, and he wanted to go in the home and rob them. So while he was searching through their things, he did find 380 that was Orly's laying next to his bed, and he stole that, and that is when he heard them return home. So he decided to hide in a closet, and he watched Don pass, and he saw Orly come into the front door, and he shot him once, and then he shot Don a few times, making sure that she was dead, and he stole their truck and left. He drove back near his father's house to pick up the backpack full of guns and ammo, and he went on his road trip. He told the police he had absolutely no justification for killing the McCools. He himself didn't understand why he did that, and that it was just something he randomly did. In Pampa, Texas, the murders of the Conrad family were still unsolved. With absolutely no motive and no suspects, the town was terrified on what could happen next. For 3 weeks, the community stayed up late in the night, armed themselves, and felt a need to be on the ready for anything. It was after that 3rd week that the sheriff's office received a tip from Missouri law enforcement. On October 19th, McDonald County Police received a phone call from an inmate at the McDonald County Prison. He told them while he and another inmate were out in the exercise yard, the other inmate admitted to a murder in Texas. And he told them that inmate was Levi King. He apparently said, there are 4 more just like this one back in Texas. The Missouri detectives immediately contacted the Gray County Sheriff and let them know that they are holding a suspect that most likely killed 4 of their people. It was during this time that it was confirmed that the AK-47 that was found in the truck at the border matched the one that was used in the murder of the Conrads. And that is when they named Levi King primary suspect, the triple homicide. But who is Levi King, and what could have pushed him to murder 5 people he had never met? Levi King was born in Arkansas in 1982. He had 6 siblings, and his parents divorced when he was just 5 years old. He lived with his dad, and he didn't see his mom barely ever, and his living conditions were disgusting. They were awful, unsanitary, filthy, and sometimes didn't have running water, and he lived with absolutely no rules. The children could write on the walls. They could go to bed whenever they wanted to. Levi looked up to his dad, who had a really long history of alcohol and drug abuse, and he was obsessed with weapons. His dad had tons of guns, knives, swords, hatchets, all around the house, free for the kids to play with anytime they wanted. And he frequently did drugs in front of his kids, and he even started to share them. By the age of 12, Levi was a really heavy drinker, and at 13, he started using drugs. And at 15, he dropped out of school, and it was at 17 was when his brother was fatally wounded in his dad's home by one of the guns, and Levi kind of lost his mind during this moment, and he was put into a mental institution, and that's where he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Levi continued to go downhill after this, and he would break into his neighbors' homes and rob them and then set their houses on fire. He was caught doing this, and he was actually sentenced to 14 years in prison, but on good behavior got out in just 17 months. He was placed in a halfway house, and he ended up escaping this halfway house, going to his mom's, where he stayed for 5 nights, but she drove him back to his dad's. Like I said, he didn't see his mom much, and drove him back to his dad's house. They got in an argument, and the next morning was when his dad drove him to the bus stop, and that is when the murders took place. Levi was indicted for 2 counts of murder in Missouri and 3 counts of murder in Texas. He faced the death penalty in both states. The first trial was in Missouri for the murder of the McCools, and Levi pled not guilty. It wasn't until a little while before the trial that the prosecutor pulled the death penalty off the table, and that's when Levi pleaded guilty to the murders. He took the stand, and even though his defense was trying to make it sound like his childhood was the reason for the murders, he said that he doesn't blame anyone or any situation. He was responsible for it, and there was no reasoning. He didn't understand why he did it. So he blamed nothing but himself, and he was sentenced to 2 life terms without the possibility of parole. 4 months later, Levi pleaded not guilty to the murder charges for the Conrad family. The trial was postponed for about 8 months, and when it resumed, he changed his plea to guilty. The prosecution was still going for the death penalty. They felt that Robin, the 10-year-old girl, was going to have trauma for the rest of her life, and she deserved to get that closure, and they were really hoping for the death penalty. But when the jury was in deliberation, all of them except for one juror was for the death penalty. That sole juror held out for 7 hours, and on October 6th, Levi received 3 life terms without the possibility of parole. I do want to talk a little bit about Robin and the amazing girl and woman that she came to be. Robin tried to immediately act like she needed to be strong. She stayed out of school for a few months after the murders happened, and when she went back to school, she felt like an outcast. She felt like people were constantly watching her and just waiting for her to have a breakdown, and she didn't want to. She refused to have what happened to her control her entire life. She lived with her dad for a while, and then she ultimately moved with her aunt. She remained living in Pampa, and she tried to be a normal teenager, is what she said. The DA constantly tried to get her to speak to a therapist, but she kept saying that she just wanted to be left alone. She didn't want to talk about it. She just wanted to be left alone. And she insisted on being there for the trial of Levi King. And after a week of testimonies, she was finally able to take the stand. And that's when she went over every single detail of the night. And the prosecutor asked her if she missed her mother. And it caught her off guard. And said, of course, she wished that her mom was there for everything that she was going through. Her 8th grade dance, her first day of high school, one day when she gets married, her mom would miss all those things. And this is when suddenly she turned to Levi King and stared him straight in the eye, and she told him how she is constantly haunted by her mother's screams. and that sometimes at night she's too afraid to go to sleep. She began to cry during the trial, and she ended up walking out and taking herself into a room, and that's when she finally let out all of the emotions that she's been holding in. And no one thought that she would come back into the courtroom, but she did. She pulled herself together and she came back into the courtroom, and she wanted to take the stand again. So after the trial, she was able to make a victim's impact statement, and she told Levi that she forgave him and that she hoped when the day comes to meet God that he would ask for forgiveness. And the entire time King wouldn't look at her. He had his head down. She said that she wanted to make this statement to him because she wanted him to know that he didn't ruin her life. He didn't have any control over her life, and she was going to be okay. She became a cheerleader. She was a lifeguard, and she actually saved a little boy's life. And she wanted to live her life as normal as possible. The police officers who were there that day when her family was tragically murdered, they raised $10,000 for her to go to a local college. And she just wanted to live her life as best as possible. So she's an incredible young woman and so strong, and I can't imagine being 10 years old and having that mindset. She's very brave and amazing. So I wanted to give a little update on her. And this case, Levi King, to just drive, to just walk and drive because your life isn't going the way that you want it to go. You take other people's lives. He's exactly where he belongs. It's for sure. He's a sick individual, and he can rot there. That's what I say about that. Let me know what you think about this case. I love to hear all your opinions, and if you have any suggestions on cases that I should cover, like always leave them in the comments below, or you can email them to me. I love hearing any of your suggestions, and I want to say thank you so much for giving me your time. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell so you can get notified every single time I upload a video, which is every single week. Have a good day. Bye.